Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Writers Podcast. Today, I have with me guest Brad Anderson. Hello, Brad. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Not too bad. You're out in rainy Vancouver, and I'm here in snowy Alberta.
Snowy Alberta, yeah. Everybody's unhappy.
Everybody's unhappy, yes.
Different types of misery.
So, Brad, your latest book is, and I hope I'm pronouncing the first name right, is Ashme's Song?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Do you have an elevator pitch for that?
Well, yeah. So, all right. So, Ashme is she has to choose between her family and her people. She is lives in a country that is in early stages of revolution and civil war.
Okay.
She's young. She's young. She wants to fight for her country. She wants to be the hero and all that. But she has this brother who has a neurological disorder, and she is his primary caretaker. And so she's kind of torn between this desire to, fight for what she believes is right, versus taking her brother and getting out of the country and getting someplace safe. And the story kind of focuses on that choice and that tension that she feels.
Okay. So, what genre is your book?
It's science fiction. So yeah, it's a science fiction story. If you're looking for subgenres, there's cyberpunk elements. I was kind of thinking like it's a space thriller punk. It's there's space opera elements. It's heavily cyberpunk elements.
Okay.
A little bit of political intrigue as well going on in there. So yeah,
Very good.
all that what you will.
Is it target? Is it YA or adult?
No, it would be for more adults. I'd say it's more adult themes. I targeted for a mature teenager could probably read it and enjoy it. But yeah, I targeted more for adults.
All right. So let's find out a little bit about you now. What was your growing up? Were you a big reader?
Yeah, that was I was actually. I probably read more back then than I do. I try to read a lot now, but social media has eroded my brain. But yeah, no, I was always reading. Always had a book. My parents got me reading from an early age, and I always had a book in hand. I probably grew up mostly on fantasy and sci-fi. It's funny. It was probably my grade 3 teacher, Mr. Hewson. I remember his name. I don't know if you're out there anymore. But he spent the whole year, every class he would start with reading a chapter from C.S. Lewis's The Narnia Tales. And he started with book 1 and he worked through pretty much all of them except the last one. So that probably, every morning I loved that class. I loved that morning. Every morning he'd read a chapter from the book through the whole series. And then they say by the end of the year, the last book was unread. And so we all had to go and read it ourselves to see how it all ended. And
clever.
That's probably what gave me the bug for sci-fi fantasy was probably that right there, I'd imagine.
Right. Cool. Well, hats off to your third grade teacher. So what were your favorite, who were your favorite authors or books?
Growing up, I did a lot of, I started off, I don't know, I sort of split between sci-fi and fantasy. If you ask me what books kind of resonate, like that still stick in my head from way back then, the Dragonlance saga. I read the Dragonlance trilogy. Loved it. I read that multiple times. I remember when I first got the Dragonlance trilogy, I read like a book a day. Like I just blasted through them. It was around Christmas time, and so I just blasted through them.
Wow.
The other thing that sticks in my mind, and as cliche as this sounds, was like Lord of the Rings. I read that when I was a teenager, and that also. So those are the two series that stick in my mind. I read a lot of books back then, but the ones that kind of stick in my mind are those two series. It's weird. I find I'm drawn to reading fantasy, but when I write, it comes out as sci-fi. So I don't know what that tells anybody about me. But if anybody has any.
insights into that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
if
is
anybody has any
interesting.
insights into that, I'd love
Yeah.
to know what's going on.
So you should try the reverse sometime. Try writing sci-fi and see if it comes out as fantasy.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you've read a lot growing up in that. At what point did you start to get the itch to become a writer?
Yeah. So while I was young, I also did a lot of writing. Like
Oh,
I
okay.
loved creative writing. It was mostly short stories when I
Sure.
was young.
Hmm.
As I got so it's I don't know it's this might be a cautionary tale. When I started to become a teenager, I was like I should write a novel because I'd all just been writing short stories and things like
Right.
that. And I
Right.
always found I could get like a couple of chapters into a novel and then I'd stop writing it. And then
Hmm.
I'd work on to something else. And then I was like in my mid teens and I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a commitment. I'm not going to write anything else until I finish this novel idea I have in my head. I had a novel idea. I'm going to write it. I'm not going to do anything else. Like I'm going to commit.
Hmm.
And I stopped writing for probably like 20 years. I stuck with the commitment. I didn't write anything else, but I didn't
Right.
finish what I had wanted to start either. So like, don't do that to yourself. That was not a good
Right.
choice for me. But yeah,
Right.
so probably for about 20 years, I didn't do much. And it's like you're getting into university and trying to get your life,
Right.
under your, get your feet under you and stuff like that.
Sure.
And then probably wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I was like, I kind of like looked at the old story that I started. I was like, this is a cool story. I should finish this. And I
Right.
finally did finish it. And I kind of feel like that was my first novel.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It wasn't this one, Ashme.
no,
No,
no, no,
no,
it
no.
wasn't this
Okay.
one. I
Okay.
wrote a trilogy sort of in my 30s. That was my
Hmm.
first kick that was my first sort of adult writing. I always
Hmm.
tell everyone those are my practice novels because I didn't know
Sure.
what I was doing. And then I
Yep.
figured by the end of the third book of the trilogy, I kind of figured out, oh, now I know how to do this.
Yep.
So I tell everybody those are my practice novels. And
Sure.
then I started to do it, I guess, I don't know if for real well, those three novels were for real. But my novel after that, Duotero, got published
Wow.
by Bundarin Press and then picked up by Shadow Paw Press. And my new book now, Ashme's Paw, has also been published. So I got those three practice books done, and now I don't know if I know what I'm doing, but yeah, I'm getting them
Right.
published at least. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, did you take any writing courses or anything during that 20-year period? Or like you said, you were busy getting your life all sorted out, but
Yeah.
were you
I,
still kind of dabbling in it at any aspects? Were you in writers groups or anything? Or
You know what? For a large for probably my late teens and well into my 20s, I played D&D,
Mhm.
and I actually found like playing D&D. So there you go. I'm a nerd. I'm like probably all of us here.
Right.
Yeah, I played D&D, and I found like that kind of scratched the same itch as writing scratched. Like writing is like I have these creative stories in my head and these characters, and I got to get them out. Same with D&D. Got these characters, got these stories. Like D&D is kind of like co-creating stories. You got the DM,
Sure.
and then you got the
Yep.
players, and you kind of create the story together. So
Yep.
it really scratched this. I find that kind of scratched the same itch for me, and I did that till I was in my 20s. Then life really,
Mhm.
got my degrees, got my jobs, had to move, stuff like that. Then I kind of so to answer your question, wasn't really part of a writing group, wasn't really into the writing scene, but I was kind of scratching the same itch through D&D. When I
Right.
started to pick up writing again in my 20s, a lot of self-taught stuff. There are a lot of courses and resources and books
Mhm.
and out there about writing.
Yes.
My wife likes to tease me because like you've heard of the great courses, like that, they have this educational content, like actual university courses that are all.
Right.
And I took a course on like sentence structure and sentence writing. I don't know if I know grammar at all, but she loves to tell that story because it paints a picture of just how much of a nerd I truly am. You took a course on writing sentences? I'm like, yeah, I did.
Well, she must love nerves. She
I
married
don't.
you.
Yeah, she might. I don't know. She must. She loves teasing them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, uh, you mentioned that you finished that practice set of novels, and then you
Yeah.
wrote your first true novel,
Yeah.
and you managed to sell it. Like,
Yeah.
what changed between your practice novels and your first novel that got you to that point where you got a professional sale?
Yeah. A lot of it was, yeah, so, in terms of, like, how did I up my game to.
Yeah, or your how did your craft change, or like,
Yeah.
was
Um,
there a like you said, you learned how to do a trilogy after the
yeah,
practice novels. What lessons did you carry from that?
yeah. A lot of it was, like, stories have a structure. Stories have a
Mhm,
structure. Stories have a lot of elements to them, right?
mhm,
And if you grow up and you read a lot, you kind of just intuitively have a vibe of what makes a story a story.
mhm,
But learning about, like, the actual like these, like, you have plot points, and you have characters, and you have character arcs, and this is how you write. And so there's structure to actually um doing it efficiently, and doing it well, and doing it like what you're doing, rather than just kind of intuitively trying to cobble together a story. Like one of the reasons why, like, I struggled with writing that first novel is because, I intuitively knew what a story was, but I didn't know I didn't really have the conceptual framework to understand the structure, to have the knowledge of the structure. Like,
mhm,
intuitively, I knew what it was, but I didn't have the frameworks in my mind to be able
mhm,
to build it out. Maybe that's the way to do it, right? Like, you know what a house looks like. It's got walls, it's got a roof, but
mhm.
just because you've lived in one your whole life, like, doesn't necessarily mean you can build one really well. Like, you need conceptual frameworks that allow
Right,
you to, okay, this is how you construct this, and this is how you do that, and these are some
right.
problems. And going through that first trilogy, I was educating myself on the way. And I feel when I read that first trilogy, I say that they're my practice trilogy, or my practice stories, like, I feel when I read it, like, I can feel a real difference in progression through all three books. Like, the first one
Sure.
was just sort of the intuitive, like, let's throw a story together. And the second one was like, oh, now I'm starting to figure out the structure. Halfway through, I'm starting to figure out the structure. And then the third one is like, okay, I know the structure, and I'm going to actually, like, build it, rather than just kind of
Mhm.
intuitively throw it together, right?
Right.
So yeah, during those three books, I educated myself a lot about the storytelling craft, right? And that's probably it, the storytelling craft. Like, what are the frameworks? What's the structure? What are the structural elements that you need to know, that you need to design?
Mhm.
And
Eh
then, yeah, so once that was done, I knew, okay, I know how to. I at least have frameworks. I at least have frameworks to know how to do this. And I think that
Mhm.
really elevated my game when I
Okay.
got to that new book.
And what kind of tools did you use, to help you with that? Do you outline, or did you create a wiki, or like, 'cause fantasy
Yeah,
novels, you usually have to do a lot of world
yeah,
building.
so much, and
Uh,
that's the fun part, yeah.
yeah.
One of that was the other, like, getting the right tool as well. Like, I was doing it all in a Word document, and a Word
Mhm.
document becomes, like, super, I find, like, unwieldy during the creation process,
Right.
because the story gets so big, and you have all these world building. What I found was Scrivener. I started with,
Mhm.
so in terms of the tools, you want to talk tools of the trade. I
Mhm.
started with this app called Y Writer.
Okay.
So it's an app that it allows you to do project management for story writing. Like, you can have chapters here, and you can have folders here for your world building.
Mhm.
I eventually, so that first book that I got published, Duotero, I wrote mostly through Y Writer, um, and then exported to Word once it was done. The tool that I'm using now is called Scrivener. I don't, that's a
Yeah,
pretty
I'm familiar
popular
with, yeah,
one.
I use it too. Yep.
Yeah, and I like Scrivener, so I
Sure.
use Scrivener. And so, yeah, like, a lot, like, Scrivener is a great project management tool for writing, because you have all your chapters, you can create all these
Mhm.
folders for all your world building, you can create subfolders for different elements of your world building, all in one spot. You can have, like, multiple screens open, so you can kind of tab from your world building to your chapter. And yeah, I found that, like, finding the right tool was also really helpful.
Right.
Uh, and
Right.
yeah.
So I'm curious, because I'm looking at your educational background. It says you have a business degree, and you teach undergraduate business courses. I don't know exactly what type of business courses you're teaching, but I know from, because in my previous life I was a BA, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of process-driven
Yeah.
methodologies in that. Did any of that? Did you ever apply any of that to your writing, or
Yeah,
did you keep those
probably. So,
separately?
yeah. Um, So yeah, so that's I have I so for I love learning, and so I have I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying this because it's embarrassing. I have more degrees than any human ought to have. Um, I have more degrees than are reasonable and are
Okay.
useful. But yeah, what does that do? So my original background, going through my life, my original background was in the sciences. I got a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, and I have a master's degree in medical science. And so,
Okay.
I have, that I have this scientific background, and I focus a lot on the biology. Like, that was my background, was in the biology, the biochemistry, and
Hmm.
immunology, and so on. So a lot of my sci-fi isn't the physics sci-fi, but I focus a lot more on the biological aspects of sci-fi
Sure.
because that's just what I know.
Yeah.
Then I shifted gears and I got into business. I got my MBA, and then I got a doctorate of business. And my doctorate of business is focused on organizational wisdom, which is a thing that nobody thinks exists. But what better thing to get a PhD in than in something that nobody thinks exists? So yeah, organizational wisdom. And I find actually, um, a lot of what I learned in that research works its way into my stories because there's
Sure.
like wisdom is like, what is it, how do you get it,
Hmm.
and there's frameworks and things like we can use to build disciplines of wisdom around, but
Hmm.
then there's also all the things that go on in the world that stop wisdom from happening or being implemented. And so I find like a lot of that is part of the sort of the background complexity of the characters and the story that I want to tell.
Hmm.
So yeah, I find sort of my original sciencey background kind of weaves its way into the sci-fi, and this more recent research into what makes people wise or
Hmm.
not kind of also works. And it's not just what makes people wise, but what are the structures in society that can facilitate that or to stop that from being implemented or realized, right? So a lot of that
Right.
kind of works its way into my stories too.
Okay, so I'm curious then, with all that background that you have, what was do you have an elevator pitch for your first novel?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the first novel, Duotero, it's an isolated world that has it's been colonized by Earth thousands of years ago, but it's lost contact with Earth thousands of years ago, and it's been struggling on its own. But there have been some changes in the natural habitat that's starting to encroach on the colony, and it's starting to destroy their crops. It's starting to infect their people, and the colony is dying. The colony is
Mm,
dying, and the story focuses on Credo and a small group of people that are trying to figure out what's going on, right? What's happening? How do we protect the colony? And
mhm,
yeah, and there's a lot of political intrigue with that one as well, and sort of political and religious and scientific conflict in that story there, as the society grapples with um, the potential destruction, the potential destruction of their home.
mm. Okay. So when you had this one, done, how did you go about, trying to get it published?
Uh, yeah, that is a slow and painful process. I see you
Right.
laughing. You sound like you must know that process. So,
Yeah.
I started, the way the process works is you write query letters to a bunch of agents. You try to get an agent and you write
Mhm,
query letters to a bunch of agents. Query letters are a little bit of an art in themselves. And so you kind of learn that art as you go as well.
mhm.
That is a slow process because like agents will tell you like, oh, it'll take 6 months to get back to you on this. And, six
Right.
months later, the answer is no. You're like, okay. So that's a slow process. And so, you send out dozens and dozens and dozens of query letters, see where that goes. Didn't get any bites with the query letters. Started to reach out to, so in the publishing industry, you have like the major publishers like Penguin and Random House and whatever.
Yeah.
And they work only through agents. Like they are not interested in talking to authors. You got to get an agent, and the agent pitches to these big houses. Then
Right.
underneath those, you have a lot of indie publishers.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those indie publishers are willing to actually interact with authors. And so so started querying agents. That's a long process. You start querying these independent publishers. That's also a long process. Like, think how long it takes to read a novel, and think
Mm-hmm.
how many novels these guys get.
Right.
It's a slow process, over years. And then eventually one day I got interest.
Mm.
It was this independent publisher, Bundarin Press, here in Canada. I'd written a short story for them for an anthology.
Mm.
So I was in email contact with the publisher. I was like, "Hey, I just have this novel. Do you do novels as well?" He's like, "Send it over."
Right.
Liked
Right.
it.
Okay. So you're writing short stories at the same
I
time?
also write short. Yeah, I also write short stories.
Okay.
What I find for me is um, every like I go through a lot of editing processes with a novel, and so you'll do
Mm-hmm.
a round of editing, and then you need to like step away from it so you can come back to it with fresh eyes. So
Right.
I'll do a round of editing. When I step away, I'll do a couple of things. Sometimes I'll start my next novel, and sometimes I'll also bang out a bunch of short stories that have been kind of in my head.
Okay.
So yeah, I kind of, during these big breaks where I'm trying to step away from a novel for editing purposes, I'll
Okay.
bang out a bunch of short stories and then try to
Nice
sell those
palette.
as well.
Yeah.
It's
Nice palette cleanser.
Yeah, yes, yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
And
nice to
there.
feel like you make progress.
Yes, for sure. Short stories, are they usually sci-fi, fantasy, or?
Yeah, sci-fi fantasy. Sort of a blend of Most of them are a blend of sci-fi fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
The one that I'd done for this Bundarin Press was probably pure sci-fi.
Mm.
I've done others that are, yeah, a little bit sort of blur the lines. My current publisher, Shadow Pop Press, he's got an anthology coming out in the spring. I have a
Mm-hmm.
short story in that, which is probably a blend between fantasy and sci-fi. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, because
anything that's not real, that's I write.
right.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of writers, the path has usually been to sell a bunch of short stories and then, sort of make a name for yourself, and then if you have a novel, then try to make that next step with
Maybe
that.
that's what I should have done. Maybe that's what I should have done. Yeah,
It's
it might have
it's
been
not.
less painful.
Yeah, it sounds like you've did this in a pretty solitary process. Did you not try attending conferences or conventions and networking and things like that nature? Or
Yeah, a little bit. And I'm getting more into the community now.
okay.
Probably for a lot of years, it was just very solitary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of that is just, balancing career and life and writing, and like how much
Sure.
time
Mm-hmm.
do I have? And then I always feel like, they talk about writing groups, and I
Yep.
always feel like my writing process is like extremely slow.
Okay.
And so it'd be like for 5 years, I'd have like nothing because it's just a work in progress. And then all of a sudden I have something. And yeah, I've always struggled with that.
Sure.
Like, so yeah, it has been a slow process. Now that I've started to get some success,
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to network more with people in the
Okay.
industry. I love talking shop with other writers. I love being
Right.
around other writers and talking shop with other
Sure.
writers.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It
but yeah, it is,
gives you
everybody's
a
spread
boost,
out over the
man. Yeah.
country. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
That's why I like these.
Yeah. um, So let's then turn to your latest book, which is Ashme's Song, and
Yeah,
you gave the elevator pitch off the top. Um, I, I'm curious, are you planning? Is this a standalone or?
yeah. I'm a bit of an anomaly. I know everybody loves series, but
Yes.
I actually like standalone novel. I like
Okay.
standalone novels.
Okay.
It's what I read, and it's what I
Mm-hmm.
write. So yeah, I
Sure.
usually, right now, my stories are all self-contained, beginning, middle, and end stories. Um, that doesn't stop people from asking me if I'm writing a sequel,
Sure.
but the
Like I just did.
intention, if somebody drove a dump truck of money up to my front lawn and said, "Hey," I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
But yeah, right now it's intended to be a standalone.
Okay. Um, I'm looking at the plot for your story, and you did mention at the beginning. It sounds like you're trying to marry a big story with a small personal story. Is that
Yes.
an accurate read?
That's actually a really good way to phrase it. Yeah, like big events are going on, but it really
Hmm.
focuses in on the experience of just, one or two characters that are caught in these events that are way beyond any one person.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
so it's kind of like a Lord of the Rings vibe then, right? Like you got the hobbits, and then
yeah, yeah. No
Frodo and
hobbits in
Sam
this.
trying to get rid of the ring, and there's these big battles going on, but it's really all about these two characters trying to
Very
carry out
much.
this mission.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, the focus is there's probably three main POV characters. The main
Okay.
focus is on Ashme and her brother, that relationship and that
Hmm.
experience, and then her
Okay.
little family group.
Hmm.
But then there's also a character. So Ashme and her brother belong to the oppressed class that's
Right.
trying to rise up. There's another character, Mason, who is actually a member of the more dominant class that's trying to quell things.
Right.
And so he's actually the third character. He's not the bad guy. He's also kind of like looking around like this, like we should not be going to war. This is not the right
Okay.
thing to do. So he's a third POV that kind of comes in there as well, and it's really really centered around those people's experiences.
Okay. Is there an antagonist, a main antagonist in
Yes.
the story?
Yeah, yeah. There is a main antagonist. Her name is Evelyn, and she's a very powerful political leader who wants to get more powerful and is
Hmm.
using this. It's the classic power move of like setting people against each other so that you can claim control. So she'd be the main antagonist. So she'd be the main antagonist, but there's I think one of the things that the story explores is the complexity of these types of conflicts. Like just
Okay.
because you're on a side doesn't mean that you're a righteous person, right?
Hmm.
The main antagonist is this Avalon person, but you see on the side of the oppressors, there's characters like Mason, who's like, "This isn't right. We need to do something different." And then there's also characters on the underclass that are looking to profit off of conflict themselves and try to
Right.
drive conflict forward, not for personal gain.
Hmm.
So there's like the main antagonist, but as you go through the story, you start to realize like like a good not everyone's a good guy who I thought would be a
Right.
good guy. Not everyone's a bad guy who I thought would be a bad guy.
Hmm. Okay, that sounds pretty complex. Is this what's the length of this book?
It is 421 pages. It's
Okay.
421 pages. About 100 if you're a writer, it's about
Mhm.
100,000 words.
Okay.
Writers know what that is. It's
Yep.
about 421 pages.
Okay.
It's about this thick.
Nice.
There we go. It's
Nice.
about it's about this
Okay.
thick.
All right. So that sounds like a lot of story to fit into one book.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you track each character's arc through the story?
Yeah. Again, focusing like so I found focusing in on like what made it writable. What made it writable was just focusing in on the experiences that these small number of characters have, right? And
Okay.
so it's like Lord of the Rings through like massive books, three of them sort of like explodes, and as a writer, as the reader, you really get to explore this whole world in depth.
Right.
This book here, it's much more self-contained. You see the world through these people's eyes, and so there's these events happening, but as the reader, you just sort of see what these people experience of these events. And so as the reader, you're like, it would be like you in real life. Like there's things going on in the world, but you just sort of see what's happening down your street, basically, right?
Hmm.
So that's kind of how I made. So how did I keep track of that? Again, a lot of world building, a lot of world building, a lot of world building. Um,
Post-it notes or
yeah,
Scrivener's
Scrivener
version?
was a lifesaver for that. Like I
Right.
have like a lot of folders in Scrivener
Right.
about all these sort of different world building aspects of it. And then again, thinking of it like from the writer's perspective, you're like, these events are going on, but what would this person see? And I think that creates a really interesting story,
Right.
because as the reader, you see things through this person's eyes, but you get this sense like, oh, there's more, there's depth to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's more there's more pieces moving on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Um, Romance is one of the biggest sellers of fiction,
Yeah, I
and
know.
a lot of the best stories do have a romantic element to them,
Yeah.
whether it be a subplot or not. Is there anything of that sort in your book?
Yeah, a little bit. It's not a focus of the book.
Sure.
So a couple of things. One, it's not a focus of the book, and what the romance that does come in, again, the book kind of explores what is the impact of these events and this conflict. What impact does that have on relationships, right? So
Right.
that main character Mason, he is married. He's married. He has children. He also has some special needs children himself.
Mm.
So this conflict puts his family in danger. But one of the conflicts that he faces is that he's like, this isn't right. We need to do something different. Whereas his wife is like totally afraid, and she's like, we need to clamp down and tighten the screws against these people
Mm.
uprising up. So he's got that tension within his family.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ashme, there is a romantic interest as well. But of course, having a romantic interest in a time of war when you have the special needs brother,
Mm-hmm.
difficult, right? So
Yeah.
there is romance in it, but it's really the romance is there is to explore the impact on relationships that these types of events have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Um, is there like any big action set pieces or anything like that in your story?
Yeah. So there are. It's I wouldn't call it like it's not like an action. It's not like a typical action adventure, but there are very much so. There's um, so Ashme kind of lives on the fringes of society, sort of lives in this criminal underworld.
Mm-hmm.
Just so there's some experiences with that. The book builds up this conflict, this greater conflict, this rising civil war that
Mm-hmm.
eventually breaks out. Like it does break out in the partway through the story. Civil war finally does break out, and then there is action there,
Okay.
as guns and soldiers finally start getting involved.
All right. Do you do you find writing action scenes challenging, fun, both?
It is challenge. Yeah, I think it is action looks good in a movie
Mm-hmm.
because it's like flashy and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it's really I think it's really hard to convey that kind of flashiness in writing. Like writing is
Right.
to describe describe something that takes 2 seconds in a movie would take like 3 pages, and it kind of ruined. Yeah. So I find
Right.
um, writing action is challenging in a story,
Mm-hmm.
because like how do you make it engaging in a movie? You make it engaging by just having all sorts of special effects and martial artists and stunts, and it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
do that in a story. And so yeah, I find in the story you need to really focus on, I think what makes it engaging in a story is focusing on the personal experience of the person in that moment.
Okay. Excellent.
And some people have skills and some people have don't, like the main character Ashme.
Mm-hmm.
She's not a fighter. Like she doesn't know how to, like she's just sort of this two-bit hood,
Mm-hmm.
living in this sort of criminal underworld, trying to look after her brother. And this war breaks out. She doesn't know how to fight, and all of a sudden, there's this fighting going on around her. And so, what's her personal experience with that? Right, like a lot of
Right.
fear, a lot of like clumsiness. Whereas Mason used to be a soldier, he actually does know how
Mm.
to fight. And so, but like, what's his personal experience? How does he approach it? Yeah, and I think that's how you make it interesting. And so action happens, but it's I think the art of writing action is you don't necessarily write like, oh, he blocked and then he kicked and then like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you do that. I think what makes it engaging is you look at the personal experience of the story, of the fear, like, and I don't think, if you write it through a person's POV, like I think when you're in the moment and adrenaline's rushing, like you're not itemizing all the actions people are taking. You're
Right.
just like, oh, you're on your back, you're on your feet. like something, right? Like whatever, right? Like just this sort of like flashes of moments happen, and you have this this visceral experience with it. So that's kind of how I approach writing action.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of the writing process?
Yeah, that's why do I find that funny? I can tell you my least favorite part
Okay.
is the first draft. Like I have a hard time, like the tyranny of the blank page, right? Like
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
hard time with the first draft. I
Yeah.
really enjoy world building. I
Okay.
love the creative process of world building. I love the
That
world
dungeon
building. I
master
love
in
the
you.
creating the characters, right?
Yeah.
But then you got to be careful. You got like if you love world building, you can get carried away with world building and not have the
Yeah.
story,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I really love the world building, and I really love sort of the polishing editing portion of it, like which is I don't
Mm,
know. A lot of people hate the editing, but I actually really enjoy the editing process. Is where you like take a lump of mud and you turn it into something beautiful. Like your first
right.
draft is this like big
Yeah.
steamy pile of whatever
Yeah.
mud. The
Yeah.
editing process is where you turn it into something beautiful, and I like that process. I
Right.
like the
Yeah.
world
I've
building,
heard
and I
that.
like that.
Yeah. I've heard that from other writers as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's where the real fun begins for a lot of writers, I think.
yeah, yeah.
All right. So you've got this book out, and your previous book are both with Shadowpaw.
They're both with Shadowpaw Press right now.
Right. Right.
Yep, they took ownership of both of those books, and you can buy them. You can buy them on Amazon. You can buy
All
them on
right.
wherever you get your books.
Can you order them from your website?
If you go to my website, bradanderson2000.com, there will be
Mhm.
links. They'll have all my books will be there. They'll have links to buy whatever book you're interested in. So yeah,
Right.
bradanderson2000.com.
Okay. Very cool. And what's next for you, sir?
What's next? I've just finished a first draft of another novel. So I
Ah.
have that big steamy pile right now sitting on my desk. And
Right.
I'm now, so yeah, I've got that new novel. I'm going to be working through the editing process of that. I have a short story coming out in, I think, early spring. So that's with Shadowpaw Press. He has Shapers of Worlds 5, an anthology of short stories. And
Okay.
I got a short story in it. That's coming out in
Okay.
the spring. So yeah, those are the two main things.
Right. Right. All right. That's very good. Is there anything that hasn't come up that you would like to mention at this time?
I think we're good. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. I loved what's that little is that robot behind you from
Yeah.
was it Lost? Is it Lost
Lost in
like the
Space.
1950s? Lost World?
1960s. Lost in Space. Yeah.
Lost in Space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Just trying to check your
B,
toys there.
B9. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's my phaser and
Yeah, got your phaser there.
communicator, tricorder.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, Brad, I really enjoyed having this conversation with you, and I wish you all the best with your future projects.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
great to hear. Okay, you take care now.
Cheers.
Yeah. Bye-bye.